Atheist returns from death with a shocking message from Jesus. The monitor's steady beep suddenly turned into a single, endless tone. My 3-year-old daughter Emma lay motionless on the operating table, her tiny chest no longer rising and falling. Through the observation window, I pressed my hands against the glass, my world crumbling as I watched the surgical team frantically try to restart her heart. "Don't you dare die, baby, please God, no," the words escaped my lips before I could stop them, a desperate prayer to a deity I'd spent my entire life denying. The irony wasn't lost on me, even in that moment of pure anguish. The surgeon looked up, his eyes meeting mine through his surgical mask. Something about his gaze struck me as hauntingly familiar, but I was too consumed by terror to dwell on it. He turned back to my daughter, his hands moving with practiced precision as he fought to save her life. "Time of death, 9:47 a.m., a voice announced, each word a dagger through my heart. I screamed. The sound that came from my throat wasn't human, it was primal, raw, the cry of a mother watching her child slip away. The hospital staff tried to hold me back, but I broke free, bursting through the operating room doors. I needed to hold her, to feel her warmth one last time. "This is your fault," I shouted at the ceiling, at the God I didn't believe in. "If you're real, where are you now? Where were you when my baby needed you?" As I cradled Emma's lifeless body, I had no idea that this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter everything I believed in. I couldn't have known that the surgeon who had just pronounced my daughter dead was the father who had abandoned me 25 years ago, or that both our lives were about to change forever. If this heart-wrenching opening scene stirred your curiosity about Sarah's journey through loss, faith, and unexpected revelations, subscribe now to unlock the full story of how a mother's deepest tragedy led to an extraordinary spiritual awakening that changed countless lives. Growing up in Boston's affluent suburbs, I learned early that life rarely follows a predictable path. My earliest memories are filled with the warm scent of my mother's perfume and the conspicuous absence of my father. He left when I was 4, walking out one rainy Tuesday morning with a briefcase and a mumbled goodbye. I remember watching through the bay window as his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, not understanding that it was the last time I'd see him. My mother, Claire Thompson, was a remarkable woman who somehow managed to be both professor of philosophy at Harvard and a devoted single parent. She filled our home with books and ideas, teaching me to question everything and accept nothing without evidence. "The world is built on facts," Sarah, she would say, her blue eyes sparkling with intensity. "Faith is a comfort for those who fear looking at reality directly." We had a routine mother and daughter against the world. Every Sunday, while other families went to church, we visited museums or conducted experiments in our kitchen. She turned every moment into a learning opportunity, explaining complex concepts in ways my young mind could grasp. When other children spoke of God and angels, I had Newton and Darwin. While they had prayers, I had equations. The void left by my father's departure was filled with academic achievements and rational discourse. My mother never spoke ill of him, but she made sure I understood that depending on others, especially men, was a dangerous proposition. "You have your mind, Sarah," she would say. "That's all you can truly count on." But life has a cruel way of testing our most firmly held beliefs. I was 15 when the accident happened. A drunk driver ran a red light, and in an instant my world of rational certainty was shattered. I sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by people offering prayers and comfort, feeling nothing but rage at their useless faith. My mother, the brilliant Professor Thompson, died on a Tuesday morning, just like my father had left on a Tuesday morning. The symmetry felt like a cosmic joke. The days following her death were a blur of well-meaning relatives and neighbors bringing casseroles and religious platitudes. "She's in a better place," they'd say. "God has a plan," each comment stoked my growing anger. What kind of God would leave a 15-year-old girl an orphan? What divine plan could justify killing a devoted mother who had already endured abandonment? I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to honor my mother's memory by embracing pure reason. My grades were perfect, my college applications flawless. I graduated as valedictorian, my speech a carefully crafted argument for self-reliance and empirical truth. The local paper called me a young mind destined for greatness. They didn't see me crying alone in my room at night, clutching my mother's old sweater, trying to remember her scent. Harvard accepted me with a full scholarship, my mother's legacy. I walked the same halls she had, sat in the same lecture rooms where she had taught. Sometimes late at night, I'd sneak into her old office, now occupied by another professor, and run my fingers along the bookshelves. In those moments, I felt closest to her, surrounded by the philosophy texts that had shaped both our lives. It was during my sophomore year that I discovered I had a talent for debate, particularly when it came to religious discussions. I could dismantle faith-based arguments with surgical precision, using the tools my mother had given me. Each victory in these debates felt like a tribute to her, a continuation of her legacy. I became known as the faith killer in academic circles, a nickname I wore with pride. The pain of my losses, first my father's abandonment, then my mother's death, hardened into an impenetrable shield of atheism. I built my identity around it, finding purpose in helping others break free from what I saw as the chains of religious delusion. I couldn't save my mother, but I could honor her by spreading her message of rational thought and skepticism. Little did I know that life was preparing to test my convictions once again, in ways that would make me question everything my mother had taught me, everything I thought I knew about faith, love, and the nature of reality itself. The certainty I had built my life upon was about to crumble, beginning with a chance encounter that would force me to confront the very things I had spent my entire life denying. My rise in the atheist community began with a viral article I wrote for The Atlantic, Faith, Humanity's Greatest Self-Deception. The piece caught fire, not just for its arguments, but for its personal touch. I spoke about watching believers pray uselessly over my mother's hospital bed, about the hollow comfort of their empty promises. The article resonated with thousands who had similar experiences. Speaking invitations flooded in universities, rationalist conventions, skeptic societies. I built my platform on a foundation of scientific evidence and emotional truth-telling. My first book, Reason's Edge: A Former Believer's Guide to Reality, became a bestseller, though I'd never actually been a believer. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it made for a better story. The lecture circuit became my second home. I'd stand before packed auditoriums, my mother's confident voice echoing in my memory as I systematically dismantled religious arguments. Show me your God, I would challenge, and I'll show you the psychological needs that created him. The applause was intoxicating, the growing following even more so. My YouTube channel, The Rational Mind, grew to over 2 million subscribers. Each week, I'd dissect near-death experiences, faith healings, and religious testimonies, exposing the scientific explanations behind them. Believers would send hate mail. Their anger only proved my point about religion's toxic nature. But it was the thank you messages that truly moved me, people who found freedom from religious trauma through my work. Then came the invitation that would change everything. The Truth Seekers Foundation, a prestigious think tank dedicated to promoting scientific worldviews, offered me a position as their lead researcher and spokesperson. Their founder, Marcus Sterling, was a titan in the secular community, known for his aggressive campaigns against religious influence in public policy. "We need voices like yours," Sarah Marcus said during our first meeting, his steel gray eyes intense. "You connect with people who are questioning, who are ready to embrace reason, but need a guide." The salary was extraordinary, the platform even more so. I accepted without hesitation. Under the Truth Seekers banner, my influence grew exponentially. We produced documentaries, curriculum materials, and policy papers. I testified before congressional committees about keeping religion out of schools, advised legal teams fighting church-state separation cases, and consulted with international secular organizations. My personal life, however, remained remarkably empty. I dated occasionally, but relationships always faltered. Men found my intensity overwhelming, my dedication to rationalism extreme. "There's more to life than facts and figures," my last boyfriend said as he left. I reminded myself of my mother's words about self-reliance. Then I met David, a brilliant neuroscientist studying consciousness. He shared my worldview but had a gentleness that balanced my intensity. When I became pregnant, it felt like the universe was finally rewarding my dedication to truth. We married quietly, no religious ceremonies or supernatural promises, just two people committing to face reality together. Emma's birth should have been the triumph of science over superstition, the best medical care, every decision based on data and research. Instead, it became the moment that would eventually shatter my carefully constructed worldview. The doctors discovered her heart defect during routine screening, but assured us modern medicine could fix it. I threw myself into research, reading every medical journal article about congenital heart conditions. I hired the best pediatric cardiac surgeon on the East Coast, vetted every member of the surgical team. I did everything right, everything rational. It wasn't supposed to end with me watching my daughter die on an operating table. The cruel twist of fate was that Emma's death made me more valuable to the truth seekers. "Your story is powerful now," Marcus told me, his voice gentle but calculating. "A woman who lost everything and still refuses to seek comfort in fairy tales, you're an inspiration." I threw myself into the work with renewed vigor, each speaking engagement a chance to honor Emma by fighting against the false comfort of religion. I became known as the Atheist Mother, a symbol of unwavering rationality in the face of life's greatest tragedy. My second book, Standing Without Angels, A Mother's Case Against Faith, became required reading in secular humanist circles. I was their champion, their proof that humans could face any loss without resorting to supernatural beliefs. But late at night, alone in Emma's untouched room, I would sometimes catch myself whispering into the darkness, asking questions that had no rational answers. Those moments of weakness only made me fight harder against the pull of faith, unaware that my entire world was about to be turned upside down in ways that no amount of reason could explain. The truth came crashing down 6 months after Emma's death. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk, mindlessly scrolling through old photos on my laptop when an email notification popped up. A colleague at Boston General had sent me Emma's complete medical records, including detailed surgical notes and staff credentials. I hadn't asked for them, didn't want them, but something compelled me to open the files. My eyes skimmed the familiar medical terminology until they caught on the lead surgeon's name, Dr. James Thompson. My coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. Thompson wasn't a rare name, but the biographical details that followed made my blood run cold. Graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1985, specialty in pediatric cardiology, originally from Boston's Beacon Hill. My father. The room began to spin as memories flooded back, that haunting familiarity in the surgeon's eyes as he pronounced my daughter dead, the way he'd hesitated slightly when introducing himself before the surgery. How had I not recognized him? But of course, how could I? The last time I'd seen him, I was 4 years old, watching through a rain-streaked window as he drove away forever. With trembling hands, I pulled up his hospital profile. The photo confirmed everything: older, grayer, but unmistakably the same man from my few childhood photos. The man who had abandoned my mother and me was the same one who had failed to save my daughter's life. I found myself in the hospital parking lot without any clear memory of driving there. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement as I waited, watching the staff entrance. After 2 hours, I saw him dressed in street clothes now, briefcase in hand, just like the last time he'd walked away from me. Dr. Thompson, my voice cracked as I called out. He turned, confusion crossing his face before recognition slowly dawned. The blood drained from his features. Sarah, he whispered my name like a prayer, ironic, given everything. Did you know? The words came out as a snarl. When you had my daughter's heart in your hands, did you know who she was? Who I was? He took a step backward, raising his hands defensively. Sarah, please let me explain. Explain what? How you walked out on your family, then 25 years later, let your granddaughter die on your operating table. Was it karma, Dad? Divine justice? Security guards were watching us now, but I didn't care. 25 years of abandonment, compounded by the fresh agony of Emma's loss, erupted like a volcano. I didn't know, he stammered. Not until after. I saw your name on the consent forms, but I thought it had to be a coincidence. By then, it was too late to recuse myself. She needed immediate surgery, and I was the best chance she had. The best chance, I laughed bitterly. She died. Your granddaughter died, and you didn't even have the courage to tell me who you were. He reached for me, but I jerked away. Don't touch me. You lost that right when you walked out. What was it, Dad? Was your career more important than your family? Was that Tuesday morning meeting too crucial to miss? Tears streamed down his face now. I've regretted that day every moment since. When I realized who Emma was, who you were, I couldn't face. Save it, I cut him off. Your regrets can't bring back my daughter. Your tears can't erase 25 years of absence. You're still running away, just like you always have. I turned to leave, then stopped. You know what's funny? All these years, I've used you as proof that we don't need God, that fathers, divine or human, only bring disappointment. Turns out I was right about that, at least. The last thing I saw as I drove away was his crumpled figure in my rearview mirror, standing in the same spot where I'd confronted him. It felt like history repeating itself, only this time, I was the one driving away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The discovery of my father's identity had ripped open wounds I thought had long scarred over. Around 3 a.m., I received an unexpected call from Marcus Sterling, the head of Truth Seekers. I heard about what happened today. His voice was calm, measured. News travels fast in hospital circles, Sarah. I think it's time we took your role with us to the next level. I sat up in bed, intrigued despite my emotional exhaustion. What do you mean? Your story just became even more powerful. A father who abandoned his family, then unknowingly fails to save his own granddaughter. You couldn't script a better argument against divine providence. We want you to lead our new initiative, Project Lighthouse. Marcus explained that Project Lighthouse would target people experiencing loss and grief, particularly those questioning their faith after personal tragedies. The irony of using my pain as a beacon to guide others away from religion wasn't lost on me. We've identified thousands of potential candidates, Marcus continued. People in hospital waiting rooms, grief support groups, funeral homes. They're vulnerable, questioning everything they believed. Your story could be the thing that finally breaks their dependence on supernatural comfort. I should have been repulsed by the calculated nature of it all, the deliberate targeting of people at their lowest points. Instead, I felt a surge of purpose. When do we start? The next morning, I found myself in the Truth Seekers' gleaming headquarters in downtown Boston. The organization's resources were far more extensive than I'd realized. They had teams of researchers, psychologists, and former clergy members working to understand and dismantle religious belief systems. Your father's involvement gives us a unique angle, said Dr. Rebecca Chen, their head of research. We can explore how religious people reconcile their faith with the idea of a supposedly skilled surgeon, one who's probably received countless prayers for guidance, failing to save his own granddaughter. The team had already drafted speaking points, social media campaigns, and outreach materials. They wanted to position me as the face of rational grief management, someone who had faced the worst possible losses without resorting to spiritual crutches. "Think about how many people you could help," Marcus said, showing me their projection models. "Every person who chooses reason over faith after hearing your story is someone saved from false hope and empty promises." I threw myself into the work with renewed vigor. We produced videos, wrote articles, and developed support group protocols. Everything was carefully crafted to guide people away from faith during their moments of crisis. The truth seekers' approach was subtle but effective. We never directly attacked beliefs, just offered alternatives to religious comfort. But it was the private support groups that affected me most. Sitting with others who had lost children, watching their struggles with faith, I felt both validated and somehow hollow. I used to pray every night, one mother told me, clutching a photo of her son. "Now I don't know what to believe." "Belief didn't save our children," I responded, reciting our carefully prepared script, understanding the reality of loss, accepting it without supernatural sugarcoating. That's what brings true healing. Within months, Project Lighthouse had exceeded all expectations. Our success stories included former pastors, religious counselors, and even a few seminary students. Each person who renounced their faith was celebrated at Truth Seekers headquarters, their testimonials added to our growing database of enlightened souls. "You're changing the world," Marcus told me one evening as we reviewed the project's metrics. "Every person who chooses reason over religion is a victory for human progress." I nodded, ignoring the small voice in my head that whispered about the ethics of targeting people in their darkest moments. After all, wasn't I just sharing my truth? Wasn't I helping people free themselves from the same delusions that had failed to comfort me? Little did I know that my own moment of crisis was approaching, one that would make me question everything about Project Lighthouse and my role in dismantling other people's faith. The truth seekers had given me purpose in my grief, but they couldn't prepare me for what was coming. The morning it happened was deceptively ordinary. I was in my garden, pulling weeds and thinking about my next Truth Seekers presentation when the first pain hit. It felt like a steel band tightening around my chest, but I dismissed it as stress or maybe heartburn. After all, I was only 38, too young for heart problems. The second wave of pain brought me to my knees, scattering dirt across my gardening apron. My left arm went numb, and suddenly my mother's voice echoed in my mind, "Listen to your body, Sarah. It speaks truths we can't ignore." The irony of remembering her scientific wisdom in this moment wasn't lost on me. I tried to reach for my phone, but it slipped from my trembling fingers. The world started to blur around the edges, colors bleeding into each other like a watercolor painting left in the rain. The last thing I saw was Emma's favorite sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze as my body crumpled onto the damp earth. Then came the darkness, not the gentle darkness of sleep, but something absolute and consuming. I couldn't feel my body anymore. The pain had vanished, replaced by a sensation of floating. My scientific mind tried to rationalize it: oxygen deprivation, neural misfiring, the final sparks of a dying brain. But what happened next defied every rational explanation I'd ever written about. A pinpoint of light appeared in the distance, growing larger and brighter. It wasn't harsh or blinding. Instead, it radiated a warmth that felt intimately familiar. I'd spent years debunking near-death experiences, explaining away the tunnel of light as hypoxia-induced hallucinations. Now, faced with it myself, all my carefully constructed theories felt hollow. The light enveloped me, and with it came a presence so profound it shook the foundations of my being. It wasn't a visual thing I couldn't see in any normal sense, but I felt it with every particle of what I was. The presence radiated pure, unconditional love, seen through every layer of my defenses, every argument I'd ever made against its existence. "Welcome home, Sarah." The words weren't spoken, they resonated through my consciousness like ripples in a still pond. I recognized the voice, though I'd never heard it before. It was Jesus, not the stained glass window version I'd spent years mocking, but something far more real and immediate. "This isn't real," I tried to say, but my scientific protests felt small and insignificant in the face of this overwhelming love. "You're a construct of my oxygen-deprived brain." A wave of gentle amusement washed over me. "You've spent so long fighting against love, child. Even now, you struggle. The presence knew every article I'd written, every speech I'd given, every person I'd led away from faith. Yet there was no judgment, only infinite compassion." Then I felt another presence, smaller but equally familiar. "Emma," my soul cried out before my mind could stop it. My daughter was there, not as the sick child who had died on the operating table, but as pure joy and light. Her love intertwined with the greater presence, showing me that she had never really left. Images began flowing through my consciousness, every person I'd helped through Project Lighthouse, but from a different perspective. I saw their pain, yes, but also the genuine comfort their faith had provided before I convinced them to abandon it. I saw the emptiness that had replaced their lost faith, masked by intellectual satisfaction but aching nonetheless. The truth hit me with devastating force in my crusade against false comfort. I had been taking away real healing. In my certainty that I knew better, I had been causing harm. The presence Jesus showed me all of this without condemnation, only with a parent's tender concern for a misguided child. "It's time to choose," Sarah, the presence said, as I felt myself being pulled back toward my body. "Will you continue to fight against love, or will you finally allow yourself to be loved?" Before I could answer, consciousness began to return. The sterile smell of hospital antiseptic replaced the warmth of the light. But something had fundamentally changed within me. A crack had formed in my wall of certainty, and through it, a different kind of light was beginning to shine. The hospital room slowly came into focus, but the memory of what I'd experienced burned brighter than any fluorescent light. The monitor beeped steadily beside me, marking each heartbeat that shouldn't have been possible. The doctors later told me I had been clinically dead for 4 minutes and 8 seconds. But it wasn't the medical miracle that occupied my thoughts. It was the conversation that had taken place in that space between life and death. Jesus had shown me more than just love and acceptance. He had revealed truths about myself that I couldn't ignore. In that eternal moment, he had taken me through my life's pivotal moments. I saw myself as a little girl, watching my father drive away, and felt the love that had surrounded me, even then love I had been too hurt to recognize. I witnessed my mother's death again, but this time I saw the countless small mercies: the stranger who held my hand in the waiting room, the nurse who stayed past her shift to comfort me, the teacher who became my surrogate parent. Most powerful was reliving Emma's last moments from a different perspective. I saw my father, her surgeon, praying desperately as he worked to save her, his own heart breaking as he realized who she was. I saw Emma's spirit gently leaving her body, not in pain or fear, but wrapped in pure love. "Your anger has been your shield," Jesus had told me in that space of light. But shields don't just keep pain out, they keep love out too. He showed me scenes from my work with truth seekers that made me weep. A grieving mother who had found peace in believing her child was in heaven until my words convinced her it was a delusion. A terminally ill man who had drawn strength from his faith until my rational alternatives left him facing death in despair. But I thought I was helping them. I had protested. I was trying to free them from false hope. The response came not in words, but in a profound understanding. Hope wasn't false just because it transcended human reason. Faith wasn't weak just because it acknowledged mystery. Love wasn't irrational just because it couldn't be proven in a laboratory. Then Emma had appeared not as an apparition or a dream, but as pure presence. In that moment, I understood that she had never really left me. The love between us transcended physical existence. She showed me memories I had forgotten: her laughter when I made silly faces, her joy at discovering butterflies in our garden, her peace even in her final days. "Mommy," she had communicated, not in words but in pure emotion, "I'm okay. I've always been okay." The truth hit me like a wave. Every time I had used her death to argue against God's existence, I had been diminishing the continuing reality of her love. Every time I had mocked others' belief in an afterlife, I had been denying my own deepest intuition about where Emma was. Jesus had shown me one final scene before consciousness returned a possible future where I continued down my current path. I saw myself growing more bitter, more convinced of my rightness, more determined to strip others of their faith. But I also saw an alternative, a future where I used my experiences to help others find hope rather than destroy it. "The choice is yours," he had said, "but remember, love is not the opposite of reason. Love is the reason for everything." Now, lying in my hospital bed, I could still feel traces of that divine presence. The rational part of my mind, the part that had built my career on skepticism, tried to explain it away, but something deeper had awakened, something that recognized truth beyond logic. A nurse came in to check my vitals, her cross necklace catching the light. Yesterday I would have felt contempt for such an obvious display of faith. Today I found myself asking, "Do you believe in near-death experiences?" She paused, studying my face. "I believe God reaches us however we need to be reached," she said simply. "Sometimes He has to stop our hearts to open them." For the first time in decades, I felt tears rolling down my cheeks that weren't born of anger or grief. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming, of a truth I had spent my entire adult life running from. I was loved, unconditionally and eternally, and no amount of rational argument could change that reality. The news of my heart attack had spread quickly through the Truth Seekers network. By the time I was discharged from the hospital, my inbox was flooded with messages from fellow activists and supporters. What none of them knew was that I was no longer the same Sarah who had left her garden that fateful morning. Marcus was the first to visit me at home, laptop in hand, ready to turn my near-death experience into another weapon against faith. "Think about it, Sarah," he said, eyes gleaming with opportunity. "Who better to debunk these experiences than someone who's had one? We could reach millions." I sat in my living room, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and felt the weight of my life's work pressing against my newfound truth. How could I tell him that everything we'd fought for, everything we'd built, felt hollow now? "I can't do it, Marcus," I said quietly. "I can't deny what I experienced." His expression shifted from excitement to concern. "The lack of oxygen to your brain created vivid hallucinations. You know this, Sarah. You've written papers about it." "I saw Emma," I whispered, watching his face harden. "Not just a memory or a hallucination. She was there, and so was I. Hesitated, knowing what was coming. So was Jesus." Marcus stood up so abruptly his laptop nearly fell. "Listen to yourself. This is exactly what we fought against, people interpreting neural misfiring as spiritual encounters. You're in shock, traumatized. You need rest, maybe therapy." But I couldn't stop. The words poured out about the overwhelming love I'd felt, the truth I'd seen about my work with truth seekers, the peace I'd experienced that defied scientific explanation. With each word, I watched my credibility crumble in Marcus's eyes. The backlash was swift and brutal. Within days, my social media was flooded with concerned messages from followers. Former allies posted lengthy analyses of how trauma and medication could create convincing spiritual hallucinations. Some suggested I'd been secretly religious all along, a plant waiting to create a dramatic conversion story. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who had once praised my rational approach to grief, now wrote a scathing article when grief destroys reason, the psychological breakdown of Sarah Thompson. She cited my father's reappearance and Emma's death as triggers that had finally broken my rational mindset. The hardest hit came from my YouTube community. People who had once praised my skepticism now flooded my channel with accusations of betrayal. "You helped me leave my faith," one comment read. "Was it all a lie? Were you just waiting to pull this publicity stunt? My speaking engagements were canceled one by one. Universities that had once competed to host me now quietly withdrew their invitations. The scientific journals that had published my articles about grief and rationality sent carefully worded emails distancing themselves from my current situation. But the external rejection wasn't nearly as difficult as my internal struggle. Every morning I woke up wondering if they were right. Had I imagined it all? Had my grief-stricken mind finally cracked under the pressure? I spent hours reading my own past writings, trying to reconcile the Sarah who had written them with the woman I was becoming. In my garden, where it had all happened, I found myself talking to God something that would have horrified my former self. "If you're real," I whispered to the sunflowers Emma had loved, "if what I experienced was true, I need help. I need to understand." The answer came in unexpected ways. A checkout clerk's kind smile when she saw me crying over a display of children's books. A ROM number that turned into a 2-hour conversation with a grieving father who'd had his own near-death experience. Small coincidences that my old self would have dismissed, but now seemed filled with meaning. One morning, I received an email from a young woman named Rachel. "I watched all your videos about leaving faith," she wrote. But something was always missing: hope. Real hope, not just intellectual satisfaction. Reading about your experience gave me permission to question my questioning, if that makes sense. Maybe there's room for both reason and faith. Her words struck a chord. I had always presented faith and reason as enemies, but what if they were more like two eyes giving depth perception to our view of reality? My scientific knowledge hadn't vanished with my encounter with Jesus. Instead, it had gained a new dimension. I began writing again, not to prove or disprove anything, but to explore this new territory honestly. I wrote about the struggle to integrate my scientific training with my spiritual experience, about learning to pray without feeling foolish. It's about missing Emma but feeling connected to her in a way that transcended death. The Truth Seekers leadership saw my new writing as a threat. Marcus called an emergency meeting of the board, and though I was still technically a member, I wasn't invited. Through sympathetic colleagues, I learned they were preparing a comprehensive response to protect our community from the infection of magical thinking. Yet, even as my professional world crumbled, I felt a strange peace growing. The presence I had encountered in my near-death experience hadn't abandoned me. In quiet moments, I could still feel traces of that all-encompassing love. It didn't answer all my questions or erase my doubts, but it gave me the courage to face them honestly. One Sunday morning, I found myself sitting in the back row of a small church, not ready to participate, just observing. The pastor spoke about Thomas, the disciple who doubted until he could touch Jesus' wounds. For the first time, I saw Thomas not as a failure of faith, but as someone whose doubts led him to a deeper truth. The summons from Truth Seekers headquarters came on a rainy Tuesday morning exactly 1 month after my heart attack. The timing wasn't lost on me. Tuesdays had always marked the major turning points in my life. My father left on a Tuesday. My mother died on a Tuesday. Emma died on a Tuesday. And now, on another Tuesday, I was being called to account for my crisis of reason. The organization's glass and steel building seemed colder than I remembered. Security guards who had once greeted me warmly now watched with suspicious eyes as I made my way to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see the entire board waiting, 12 people who had once been my closest allies in the fight against faith. Marcus stood as I entered, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. "Sarah, thank you for coming. We've been worried about you." The others nodded in rehearsed sympathy, but their eyes were hard. "Before we begin," he continued, "we want you to know that we understand. You've been through trauma, losing Emma, discovering your father's identity, and now this health crisis. It's natural to seek comfort in irrational beliefs during such times." I looked around the table at these people who had once valued my every word. Dr. Chen was taking notes, probably gathering material for another psychological analysis. James Foster, our legal counsel, had a stack of papers in front of him that I suspected were severance agreements. "We've prepared a statement for you to sign," Marcus said, sliding a document across the table. "It acknowledges that your recent experiences were the result of medication, oxygen deprivation, and emotional stress. We'll handle the public relations, help you rebuild your credibility." I picked up the paper, scanning its carefully worded denouncement of everything I'd experienced. They wanted me to call my encounter with divine love a chemically induced hallucination, to describe my reunion with Emma as a grief-driven fantasy. "What if I don't sign?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a concerned whisper. "Sarah, think about your legacy, everything you've built. Think about the people who depend on your example. We can help you through this episode. But if you persist in this delusion, we'll have to take steps to protect our mission." "You mean protect your funding?" I said quietly. "How many donors have threatened to pull out since my conversion?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. I'd hit a nerve. "This isn't about money," Dr. Chen interjected. "It's about truth. Scientific, verifiable truth. You taught us that, Sarah. You showed us how dangerous magical thinking can be." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of their judgment. I did teach that, didn't I? I taught that anything that couldn't be measured in a lab wasn't real. That love was just chemistry, hope was self-deception, and faith was a crutch for the weak. Walking to the window, I watched raindrops trace patterns on the glass. But what if I was wrong? What if there are truths that can't be proven under a microscope? "Listen to yourself," Marcus exploded, his mask of concern cracking. "You sound like every religious zealot we've ever debunked. What's next? Miracle healings? Speaking in tongues? Where does this descent into superstition end?" I turned back to face them, feeling surprisingly calm. "It ends here. I won't sign your statement. I won't deny what I experienced. Fire me, discredit me, write whatever psychological profiles you want, but I won't lie." "Think carefully about what you're doing," James Foster spoke up. "Your contracts include non-disclosure agreements. If you try to promote religious ideas while still associated with truth seekers, you'll sue me," I laughed softly, "for telling the truth. Isn't that what we've always claimed to champion?" Marcus stood, his face flushed with anger. "The truth. You had a heart attack. Your brain was deprived of oxygen. Everything you think you experienced can be explained by basic neuroscience. That's the truth." Maybe I admitted. Maybe it was all just misfiring neurons and chemical reactions. But here's what I know: that hallucination showed me more truth about myself, about love, about the harm we've been doing, than all our years of rational inquiry. "The harm we've been doing," Dr. Chen's voice was sharp. "We help people break free from superstition. We give them tools to face reality without fairy tales." "Do we?" I challenged. "Or do we take away their hope and give them nothing in return? I've read thousands of letters from people who lost their faith because of us. How many of them are truly happier? How many have found something better than what they lost?" The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker across some of their faces, but Marcus quickly took control again. "Sarah Thompson," he said formally, "your employment with truth seekers is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your office. Any attempt to use our platform or resources to promote religious ideas will be met with immediate legal action." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. You know what the saddest part is? You're all so certain you know everything. I used to be that certain too. But true skepticism means being willing to question everything, even your own certainty. As security led me out, I heard Marcus call after me, "You'll regret this, Sarah. When the religious community gets tired of parading you around as their trophy convert, you'll have nothing left." But he was wrong. Standing in the rain outside the Truth Seekers building, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had lost my career, my reputation, and my community, but I had found something far more precious: the freedom to seek truth without the constraints of predetermined conclusions. I should have known they wouldn't let me go quietly. 2 weeks after my dismissal from Truth Seekers, I received an anonymous email containing files that made my blood run cold. Internal documents revealed Project Lighthouse wasn't just targeting grieving people, they were actively creating crises of faith through orchestrated personal tragedies. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence. Medical records altered to shake religious families' faith, accidents arranged to test believers' conviction. A network of plants and grief support groups trained to guide conversations toward doubt and despair. And at the bottom of it all, my name is the project's inspiration. That night, walking to my car after a meeting with a journalist, I noticed 2 men following me. Before I could reach for my phone, something sharp pricked my neck. The parking garage began to spin, and the last thing I heard was, "Make it look natural, like her heart again." The darkness came faster this time, but different chemical forced. I felt myself slipping away, but instead of the peaceful transition of my first near-death experience, this was violent, chaotic. My consciousness fought against the artificial void. Then, suddenly, the light returned, brighter than before, urgent and immediate. Jesus' presence enveloped me, but now there was a warrior's strength beneath the love. "It's not your time," the presence conveyed. "There is work yet to do, people to save." Images flashed before me, hundreds of faces, people who had been targeted by Project Lighthouse, their pain, their confusion, their lost hope, all orchestrated by those I had once trusted. Among them, I saw a familiar face, Marcus's daughter, Rachel, who had died 20 years ago. The truth hit me: his crusade against faith wasn't about reason at all. It was about revenge against the God he blamed for his loss. "You must live," Sarah, the presence insisted. "You must speak for those who have been silenced." Emma appeared beside me, her light pulsing with determination. "Fight, Mommy," she urged, her love giving me strength. "Show them what real truth looks like." Through the haze of drugs, I felt my heart struggling. The men had miscalculated the dose, not knowing about my recent cardiac surgery. My medical condition was fighting against their perfect murder. A new presence joined us, my mother. Not as I had last seen her, broken in a hospital bed, but radiant with the wisdom I had always admired. "Use your mind, Sarah," she said, "and your heart. They work best together." The light began to fade as I felt myself being pulled back. This time the return was a battle, every heartbeat a conscious choice to live. Jesus' presence stayed with me, strengthening each pulse, guiding me back to my body. I awoke to the sound of approaching footsteps. Through blurred vision, I saw a security guard making his rounds. My attackers had fled, leaving me for dead between 2 cars. The guard's flashlight beam hit my face, and I heard him call for help. The hospital was familiar now, the same one where I'd had my heart attack, where Emma had died, where my father had failed to save her. But this time I wasn't fighting against faith. I was fighting with it, every breath a testament to both medical science and divine intervention. The police took my statement, but I could tell they were skeptical. A respected think tank arranging murders? It seemed far-fetched, but I had been one of them, after all. I knew how easily they could dismiss inconvenient truths. My father came to visit me in the hospital. Now that I could see him through eyes cleared by love rather than clouded by hatred, I recognized the weight of regret he carried. "I heard what happened," he said quietly. "I know these people. I know what they're capable of." "You were part of Truth Seekers?" I asked, though somehow I already knew the answer. He nodded. "Years ago, after your mother died, I thought if I could prove there was no God, I wouldn't have to feel guilty about abandoning you. Marcus helped me create a new identity, build my medical career. But watching Emma die on my table..." His voice broke. That's when I realized no amount of reason can fill the God-shaped hole in our hearts. As I lay in the hospital bed, I understood that my second brush with death wasn't just an assassination attempt, it was a wake-up call. The truth seekers weren't just promoting skepticism, they were waging a war against hope itself. And I had been their unwitting general. The evidence I'd received was just the tip of the iceberg. How many others had been silenced? How many lives had been deliberately broken in the name of freeing people from faith? The same tactics I had once praised as strategic intervention now revealed themselves as something far darker. I knew what I had to do. If I survived this, I would expose everything. Not to destroy the organization, revenge wasn't the answer, but to save those still trapped in their web of orchestrated despair. The truth needed to come out, not just about their methods, but about the possibility of something greater than pure reason. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I felt the dual presence of divine love and human determination. Science had saved my body, but faith had saved my soul. Now, both would give me the strength for what was to come. The press conference was Marcus's idea of damage control. After news of my drug overdose hit the media, truth seekers positioned themselves as concerned former colleagues, worried about my mental health. The venue was packed, journalists, former supporters, and current truth seekers members all waiting to hear Marcus explain my tragic descent into religious delusion. I watched from the back of the room as he took the stage, the perfect picture of rational concern. My father sat beside me, squeezing my hand for support. In my pocket, I carried a flash drive containing all the evidence of Project Lighthouse's true nature. We're here today to address the unfortunate situation with Sarah Thompson, Marcus began, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. A brilliant mind, now clouded by trauma and emotional distress. We've tried to help her privately, but recent events have forced us to speak publicly. That was my cue. I stood, my voice clear and strong. Why don't we tell them about the kind of help you offered, Marcus? The kind that comes with a needle in a dark parking garage. The room erupted in murmurs as I walked toward the stage. Security moved to stop me, but the media presence made them hesitate. Marcus's composed facade cracked slightly. "Sarah," he said, forcing a smile, "I'm glad you're here. Everyone can see for themselves what we've been dealing with. The paranoid delusions, the conspiracy theories." I reached the stage and faced him directly. "Tell them about Rachel, Marcus. Tell them why you really started Project Lighthouse." The color drained from his face. In 20 years, he had never publicly spoken his daughter's name. "This is exactly what we mean," he tried to recover, making wild accusations. "Rachel was 16 when she died of leukemia," I continued, turning to address the crowd. "She died believing in God, finding peace in her faith, and her father couldn't bear it. Isn't that right, Marcus? You couldn't stand that she died with hope instead of despair." "Shut up," Marcus lunged forward, his careful mask shattering completely. "You don't get to talk about her. You don't know anything." The room fell silent, shocked by his outburst. In that moment, I saw not the calculated leader of truth seekers, but a broken father whose grief had twisted into a mission of destruction. "I know everything, Marcus. I know about the targeted families, the orchestrated tragedies, the planted grieving parents and support groups. I know because I helped create it, believing we were freeing people from delusion. But we weren't freeing them, we were breaking them. We were breaking them." I plugged the flash drive into the podium's laptop, and the screens behind us filled with documents, emails, and surveillance photos. Evidence of Project Lighthouse's true nature played out for all to see. "You're just like all the others," Marcus spat, his composure completely gone. "Weak-minded people who need fairy tales to face reality. Rachel was stronger than that. She should have raged against death, fought against false comfort. Instead, she smiled and talked about seeing angels." His words hung in the air, a father's agony laid bare. In that moment, I didn't see my would-be killer or the mastermind of a cruel organization. I saw myself as I had been someone so hurt by loss that destroying others' faith felt like justice. Your daughter's faith didn't make her weak, Marcus. It gave her the strength to face death with peace instead of bitterness. She tried to share that peace with you, but you couldn't accept it. So you built all this to ensure no one else could find the comfort you denied yourself. Tears streamed down his face now. 20 years of carefully constructed rationality crumbling under the weight of unresolved grief. She was supposed to be afraid, he whispered. Like I was afraid, like I was afraid, like I still am. I stepped closer, speaking softly. Rachel wasn't afraid because she knew love is stronger than death. I've seen it, Marcus. I've seen where faith leads, and it's not into darkness, it's into light. The room was completely silent now, watching this unexpected collision of reason and faith, grief and healing. Journalists had forgotten to take notes, photographers had lowered their cameras, all witnessing something raw and real. I forgive you, I said, reaching for his hand, for what you did to me, to others, to yourself. And Rachel forgives you too. I know because I've seen where she is, and there's no room for unforgiveness in that light. Marcus crumpled to his knees, decades of suppressed emotion breaking free. In front of cameras and critics, supporters and skeptics, the great champion of pure reason wept like a child. And in that moment, something shifted in the room, a collective recognition that some truths transcend both faith and reason. The truth seeker's empire would crumble in the coming days, but that moment of raw humanity accomplished what years of debate never could. It showed that the greatest truth isn't found in either pure faith or pure reason, but in the love that transforms both. The aftermath of Marcus's public breakdown unleashed a flood of revelations. Former truth seekers' employees, emboldened by what they'd witnessed, began coming forward with their own stories. Each new disclosure felt like a knife in my heart, knowing I had been part of this machinery of despair. I sat in my study, reading through hundreds of emails from victims of Project Lighthouse. One story particularly haunted me: the Wilsons, a deeply religious family who lost their son in what they thought was a random accident. The accident had been carefully orchestrated by truth seekers' operatives to look like God had failed to protect their child. The family's subsequent loss of faith had been celebrated as one of our greatest successes. Your presentations gave us the strength to question everything Mrs. Wilson had written in a letter I'd once proudly shared at conferences. Now, reading it again, I saw the hollowness behind her words of gratitude. We hadn't given her strength, we'd stolen her last source of comfort. The evidence kept mounting. Files revealed a network of paid actors infiltrating grief support groups, trained to share stories designed to shake religious faith. They targeted vulnerable moments: funerals, hospital waiting rooms, addiction recovery meetings. We had scripts for every scenario, carefully crafted to turn personal tragedy into a weapon against faith. My hands trembled as I opened a folder marked Operation Divine Silence. Inside were detailed profiles of religious leaders who had experienced personal tragedies. Truth seekers hadn't just waited for crises of faith, they had manufactured them. Anonymous letters sent to congregations questioning their pastor's integrity, staged photos suggesting moral failings, all timed to coincide with moments of grief or loss. Target responds well to intellectual challenges during emotional distress. Read one psychological profile. Recommend intensifying pressure during daughter's cancer treatments. These weren't research notes, they were attack strategies against people's souls. Dr. Chen's research papers took on a sinister new light. Her studies on spontaneous loss of faith had been rigged from the start. The subjects hadn't naturally questioned their beliefs, they had been systematically broken down by our interventions. We had called it accelerated rational awakening. In reality, it was emotional manipulation on an industrial scale. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Truth seekers hadn't just been promoting atheism, they had been waging a deliberate war against hope itself. Every success story I had celebrated represented a person stripped of their fundamental source of strength and meaning. I found my own training materials from when I first joined the organization. Pain is the crack through which doubt enters, I had written. Our role is to widen that crack until the whole foundation of faith crumbles. I had thought I was liberating people from delusion. Instead, I had been teaching others how to weaponize suffering. The financial records were equally damning. Truth seekers had a crisis investment fund dedicated to creating opportunities for faith disruption. They bought controlling interests in funeral homes to access grieving families. They funded research designed to prove the psychological harm of religious belief. They even paid medical professionals to emphasize the random, meaningless nature of disease and death. In my office at home, I had a wall of awards from secular humanist organizations. Looking at them now, I felt physically sick. Each plaque and certificate represented lives we had deliberately damaged in the name of rational enlightenment. The most heartbreaking discovery was a database labeled legacy cases. These were long-term tracking files of people whose faith we had successfully destroyed. Follow-up reports documented increased rates of depression, substance abuse, and suicide attempts. We had classified these as adjustment periods in the transition to a rational worldview. How had I been so blind? Project Lighthouse was never about illumination, I wrote in my journal that night. It was about ensuring others felt the same darkness that consumed its creators. We didn't lift people out of delusion, we dragged them into despair. And I, God help me, showed them the way. The hospital chapel was empty when my father found me there. It was late evening, and I had been sitting in the quiet space, surrounded by the evidence of truth seekers' manipulation, when he walked in. The same chapel where years ago I had scoffed at grieving families seeking comfort. "I've been looking everywhere for you," he said, his voice echoing in the empty room. Then I remembered how you used to hide in the university library when you were upset. Some things don't change. I looked up at him, Dr. James Thompson, the renowned surgeon, my long-lost father, Emma's unwitting killer. "Did you know," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "when you joined truth seekers after abandoning us, did you know what they really were?" He sat down beside me, his shoulders heavy with the weight of secrets. "I knew enough. Marcus found me at my lowest point, after your mother died. He convinced me that destroying faith was the only way to atone for leaving you." "So you helped them?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I provided medical credentials for their studies, consulted on how to make their orchestrated tragedies look natural. His hands trembled as he spoke, but I never knew about Emma's surgery until it was too late. The truth I had been dreading finally emerged. "Tell me everything," I demanded. "Marcus knew who she was, my granddaughter, your daughter. He arranged for my transfer to Boston General just in time for her case. It wasn't a coincidence that the top pediatric surgeon suddenly became available." My heart seemed to stop. "Are you saying Emma's death was?" "Not intentional," he cut in quickly, his voice breaking. "I would never. But Marcus saw an opportunity. A prominent atheist activist loses her child during surgery performed by her estranged father. He called it divine providence, ironically working in our favor." I felt the room spinning. Every memory of Emma's last days took on a horrifying new dimension. The rush transfer to Boston General, the insurance complications that mysteriously resolved, the timing of it all. "I tried to save her, Sarah. I swear to God, I did everything I could, but when I realized who she was, who you were, my hands weren't as steady as they should have been." The pressure of knowing. "Stop," I held up my hand. "Just stop." I stood up, walking to the small altar at the front of the chapel. The cross there seemed to watch us both, bearing witness to this moment of terrible truth. "I've spent years hating you," I said finally. "First for leaving, then for Emma. I thought that hate was keeping me strong. But it was poisoning everything, wasn't it? Just like truth seekers poisoned everything they touched. My father stayed silent, tears streaming down his face. "Did you ever wonder," I continued, "why Emma's middle name was James? Mom named her that. Even after everything, she wanted me to remember that forgiveness is stronger than hate." He looked up sharply, surprise cutting through his grief. "I felt it, Dad. In that light during my near-death experience. I felt love that made all our hatred seem so small, so meaningless. Emma is in that love now. She's been trying to show us both that the way forward isn't through more pain." I turned to face him fully. "I forgive you," I said, the words carrying the weight of decades. "For leaving. For Emma. For everything. Not because you deserve it, but because hate has taken enough from this family." He broke down completely then, decades of guilt and grief pouring out in great, heaving sobs. I held him as he cried, there in the chapel where I had once mocked others' tears. Above us, the evening light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colors across our joined shadows. In that moment, I understood that this too had been part of the journey, this painful truth, this difficult mercy. "Emma wants us to heal," I whispered. "All of us. Even Marcus. Even truth seekers. That's what I felt in the light, that love is the only truth that matters in the end." 2 days after our confrontation in the chapel, my father suffered a massive heart attack during surgery. The irony wasn't lost on me. Like father, like daughter. I sat in the same waiting room where he had once pronounced Emma dead, watching different doctors fight for his life. When he finally stabilized, he was different. There was a light in his eyes I had never seen before, a peace that transcended our family's legacy of pain. As soon as he could speak, he asked me to sit close to his hospital bed. "I saw them, Sarah," he whispered, his voice weak but urgent. "Your mother, Emma, and Jesus." Just like you described, his hands trembled as he reached for mine. I was performing a routine bypass when everything went dark. Then there was that light so much brighter than the surgical lamps, but it didn't hurt to look at it. I held his hand as he continued, recognizing the mixture of awe and confusion I had felt during my own experience. "Mom was there?" I asked softly. "She was radiant, Sarah. Not sick or broken like at the end. She showed me every moment I had missed with you, your first day of school, your graduations, your wedding. But she wasn't angry. She just kept saying, love is the only thing that matters. Love is the only thing we take with us." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he described Emma's presence. "She called me Grandpa, can you imagine? After what I did, she just hugged me and said, 'It's okay.' I never blamed you. The love I felt in that moment, it washed away decades of guilt in an instant." But it was his encounter with Jesus that had transformed him most profoundly. He showed me why he let me fail that surgery, my father said, his voice breaking. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't even about Emma, not really. It was about breaking the chain of bitterness that had bound our family for generations. He described how Jesus had revealed to him the full scope of truth seekers' impact, not just on our family, but on thousands of others. I saw every person we had hurt, every faith we had broken, but I also saw the healing that's possible when we stop fighting against love. The doctors attributed his experience to oxygen deprivation, just as they had with mine, but they couldn't explain the changes in him. The renowned surgeon who had once viewed patients as mere biological puzzles now spent hours talking with them, understanding their fears, sharing his own journey from darkness to light. He requested a transfer to the hospital's palliative care unit, where he could work with terminally ill patients. Science can heal bodies, he told me, but only love can heal souls. I spent my career running from that truth, no more. Word spread through the medical community about Dr. Thompson's transformation. Some colleagues mocked him, just as they had mocked me. Others were drawn to the change in him, secretly sharing their own unexplainable experiences with faith and healing. One evening, I found him praying with a young patient's family, the same kind of family truth seekers would have once targeted in their moment of vulnerability. Instead of exploiting their pain, he was sharing their burden, showing them that hope and science could coexist. The biggest lie truth seekers taught us, he said later, was that we had to choose between faith and reason, but God gave us both hearts and minds for a purpose. They're meant to work together, not tear each other apart. His near-death experience hadn't just reconciled him with his faith, it had reconciled him with his calling as a healer. Every surgery is a prayer now, he told me. Every patient is a reminder that we're all part of something greater than ourselves. Watching him transform from the man who had abandoned his family into someone who could face death with compassion and hope, I understood that miracles aren't always about physical healing. Sometimes they're about hearts being restored, relationships being rebuilt, and light breaking through generations of darkness. The day after my father's recovery, I received an unexpected visitor in my office. Marcus's wife, Eleanor, whom I'd met only once at a Truth Seekers fundraiser years ago, stood in my doorway looking exhausted but determined. "There's something you need to know about Rachel," she said, without preamble. "Something Marcus has hidden from everyone. Even from himself." She placed a worn journal on my desk, Rachel's diary from her final months. As I read through the pages, Rachel's voice emerged clear and powerful. She wasn't the angry, disillusioned teenager Marcus had described. Instead, her words revealed a young woman whose faith had grown stronger through her suffering. "Daddy keeps trying to make me angry at God," she had written. "But how can I be angry at the source of so much love? Even in this hospital, I see miracles every day, not just in medicine, but in the way people care for each other. That's where God is." Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes as I read. "Marcus wasn't always like this," she said softly. "Before Rachel got sick, he was a different man. He used to teach Sunday school, if you can believe it. But watching her embrace faith while dying, it broke something in him." The journal revealed that Rachel had known about her father's growing bitterness. Her final entry, written just days before her death, was a letter to him. "Dear Daddy, by the time you read this, I'll be with Jesus. Please don't let my death become your reason to stop believing in love. That would be the only way I could truly die." He never read it, Eleanor explained. He couldn't bear to open her journal. Instead, he rewrote her story, convinced himself and everyone else that she died in despair. Truth Seekers became his way of validating that false narrative. The truth stunned me. The entire organization, its mission, its methods, its war against faith had been built on a father's inability to accept his daughter's peaceful death. We had weaponized his pain, using it to inflict wounds on countless others. Eleanor shared more revelations. The initial funding for Truth Seekers had come from selling Rachel's college fund. The organization's founding date was Rachel's birthday. Even the name Project Lighthouse had been inspired by Rachel's favorite Bible verse about God's light shining in darkness. "Marcus doesn't just need to be stopped," Eleanor said, her voice strengthening. "He needs to be healed. Rachel's last wish was for him to find his way back to love. Maybe that's why God let both you and your father have those near-death experiences, to help break this cycle of pain." She showed me photos of Rachel's last days, images that contradicted everything Marcus had claimed. Instead of a bitter teenager raging against God, they showed a young woman radiating peace, surrounded by friends from her youth group, writing encouraging notes to other cancer patients. The night she died, Eleanor continued, she asked for her father. She told him, "Daddy, don't be afraid. Love is stronger than death." Those were her last words, but he twisted them in his mind, convinced himself she was warning him about the futility of faith. The pieces fell into place: why Marcus had reacted so violently to my near-death experience, why he had tried to silence me. I hadn't just threatened Truth Seeker's mission, I had threatened the elaborate defense he had built against his daughter's final message of love. "What do you want me to do?" I asked Eleanor. "Help him remember who Rachel really was," she replied, pushing the journal toward me. Not the angry atheist he invented to justify his crusade, but the loving daughter who wanted him to find peace. It's time for the truth about Truth Seekers to come full circle. As Eleanor left, I sat with Rachel's journal, feeling the weight of its truth. In its pages, I found not just the key to understanding Marcus's darkness, but a powerful testimony to the very faith he had spent 20 years trying to destroy. The day we launched Emma's Hope Foundation was bright and clear, the kind of autumn morning that Emma had loved best. The ceremony was held in the hospital garden, where both my father and I had experienced our brushes with death and glimpses of divine love. Marcus sat in the front row, looking both older and somehow lighter than I'd ever seen him. After sharing Rachel's journal with him, something had cracked open in his hardened heart. He'd spent weeks in seclusion, reading and rereading his daughter's words, finally allowing himself to feel the love she had tried to share in her final days. Emma's Hope Foundation. I began my speech, isn't just about helping families facing medical crises. It's about bridging the false divide between faith and science, between reason and love. My daughter Emma and Marcus's daughter Rachel taught us that these aren't opposing forces, they're different expressions of the same truth. The Foundation's mission was unique, providing medical support while honoring the spiritual needs of families in crisis. We had assembled a team of healthcare professionals who understood that healing involves body, mind, and spirit. My father served as medical director, bringing his transformed understanding of holistic care to every case. In this garden, I continued, 3 generations of our family encountered something beyond scientific explanation. My father, myself, and my daughter Emma, each of us touched by divine love in our own way. Today, we're turning this place of personal transformation into a sanctuary for others facing similar journeys. The garden had been redesigned to include a memorial fountain at its center. Water flowed over inscribed stones bearing messages of hope from both scientific and spiritual perspectives. Emma's favorite scripture verse, "Perfect love casts out fear," stood alongside Einstein's quote about science without religion being lame and religion without science being blind. Marcus stood up unexpectedly, asking to speak. His hands trembled as he approached the podium, pulling Rachel's journal from his pocket. 20 years ago, he said, I lost my daughter to cancer. But the truth is, I lost myself too. I turned my pain into a weapon, using it to destroy the very thing that had given Rachel peace, her faith. His voice broke as he read Rachel's final letter to him. The audience sat in stunned silence, many wiping away tears as they realized that Truth Seeker's fearsome leader had been driven by his own unresolved grief. Today, he continued, I'm announcing the conversion of Truth Seeker's remaining assets into a trust for Emma's Hope Foundation. Rachel wanted her college fund to help others. It's time to honor that wish the way she intended, by spreading hope, not destroying it. The Foundation's first initiative was a research partnership between religious institutions and medical centers, studying how spiritual well-being affects physical healing. We created support groups where doctors and chaplains worked together, where questions of faith were explored alongside medical treatments. My father introduced our pilot program, specialized training for medical staff in supporting patients' spiritual needs without compromising scientific care. I spent years thinking I had to choose between being a man of science and a man of science and a man of faith, he said. Now I understand that the greatest healing happens when we embrace both. The ceremony concluded with a powerful symbol of reconciliation. Marcus and my father, once bitter enemies in the war between faith and reason, worked together to plant a tree in memory of both Emma and Rachel. As they patted the soil around its roots, I saw love doing what argument never could, healing hearts, restoring relationships, making old things new. Emma's Hope Foundation became more than just another healthcare charity. It became a testament to the truth I had discovered in my near-death experience, that love is the force that bridges all divides, heals all wounds, and lights the way forward, even in our darkest moments. On quiet evenings, I still sit in my garden among Emma's beloved sunflowers. Sometimes I catch glimpses of that divine light I encountered during my near-death experiences, not as overwhelming as before, but gentle reminders of the love that transformed my life. Looking back over the past year since Emma's Hope Foundation began, I see miracles in the small moments. There's the young mother who found strength to face her son's cancer treatments through both medical science and prayer. The atheist doctor who held a patient's hand during a crisis, discovering that compassion transcends belief systems. The grieving father who learned to trust again after losing his faith and finding a different kind of hope. Perfect love casts out fear. Emma's favorite verse has taken on new meaning. I've watched it play out in countless ways. Marcus finding peace in Rachel's journal, my father rediscovering his calling as a healer, former Truth Seekers members healing from their own wounds of doubt and disillusionment. The most profound change has been in understanding that God's love doesn't demand we abandon reason. Instead, it invites us to use our minds while opening our hearts. Science hasn't lost its beauty for me. If anything, it's more wonderful now. Every medical breakthrough, every natural law we uncover feels like uncovering another facet of divine creativity. My near-death experiences showed me that love is the fundamental force of the universe, not an emotion or a concept, but the very fabric of reality. Everything else we argue about, religion versus science, faith versus reason, belief versus doubt, are just different ways of trying to understand this basic truth. I still give lectures, but they're different now. Instead of demolishing faith, I share stories of healing and hope. I talk about Emma, about Rachel, about the countless families I've met who found strength in both prayer and medicine. Some former colleagues call it a betrayal of reason, but I've learned that the greatest reason of all is love. The Foundation's work has expanded beyond our initial hopes. We've opened centers and hospitals across the country, creating spaces where families can receive both medical care and spiritual support. Our research on the connection between faith, hope, and healing is changing how the medical community approaches holistic care. Marcus now leads our grief counseling program, using his own journey from bitterness to healing to help others find their way. My father's medical rounds include time for prayer with patients who request it, showing that scientific expertise and spiritual comfort can work hand in hand. The garden where it all began has become a sanctuary for many. People come to sit by the fountain, reading the messages of hope, finding their own path between faith and reason. Sometimes I see them touching the inscribed stones, tears flowing as they discover they're not alone in their journey. Emma's presence feels strongest here. Not in a sad way, but in the joy of seeing her legacy continue. Every child who finds hope in our programs, every family that discovers strength in both science and faith, carries a piece of her spirit forward. I've learned that God's love doesn't fit into our neat categories or conform to our demands for proof. It simply is as constant as gravity, as vast as the cosmos, as intimate as a child's laugh. It meets us in hospital rooms, in gardens, in moments of triumph and despair, in the spaces between our certainties. The truth that nearly died with me in this garden has blossomed into something beautiful, a testament to love that transcends our human divisions. Emma's Hope Foundation stands as proof that the greatest healing happens when we stop forcing people to choose between head and heart. Now, when people ask about my near-death experiences, I tell them this heaven touched earth not to end our questions, but to show us that love is the answer we've been seeking all along. In the end, that's what Emma and Rachel both knew, that perfect love isn't about having perfect faith or perfect understanding. It's about opening our hearts to something greater than ourselves. And in that opening, we find what we've been looking for all along: hope that heals, truth that transcends, and love that never ends. If Sarah's journey from skepticism to faith touched your heart and made you reflect on your own path, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Has your life been touched by a similar experience of divine love? Share this story with friends and family who might need a reminder that hope exists in both science and faith. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories of transformation, and don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of unconditional love. Together, let's build a community that bridges the gap between faith and reason.